Hello students. Today we are going to discuss about T.S. Eliot's poem Prelude. T.S. Eliot is a poet who brought about a revolution in English poetry in the first half of the 20th century. Preludes is one of the prominent works of Eliot, written in 1910 and 1911. It is a series of 4 short poems written early in his career and published in his first collection, True Fork and Other Observation in 1917. The title of the poem holds a special position in terms of analysis. Preludes means an introduction to something. To be specific, in a musical sense, it is a small composition that is played before the main piece of music. Eliot, who would effectively end his poetry career with a long work named Four Quartets, was fond of musical titles for his poems. This suggests that these poems are small scale as well as being short. They are seeking to capture something small. In this case, the details of everyday urban living. In that sense, Preludes is just a small window view of the characteristics of the empty society we are shown. In reality, the actual society we live in is a terrible place. Preludes is very effective of Eliot's poem and makes an important contribution to Eliot's development from prefer to the wasteland. Eliot is learning economy, vividness, and the value of impersonality and changes of vision. The mood and tone are vital. These constitute what the poem communicates, and every part of the poem is intended to concentrate the overall impressions of sordid, hopelessness, shabbiness, and disenchantment. Pursues a technique he was very fond of, the technique of conveying the dehumanization by fragmenting the human elements of his poem into parts of the body. As we can say, there are so many phrases in his poems. In Prelude, we have muddy feet and hands, palms of both soiled hands, insistent feet, fingers and eyes. In this way, no complete human soul or human body emerges. All is as mechanical and as dislocated as the action of a robot. It is Eliot's comment in certain moods on human behavior. The technique is greatly developed and expanded in the wasteland, and the prelude may appear to be a majestic representation of urban life, recorded without comment, but the objectivity and detachment are illusory. It is difficult to separate the objects of perception from the perceiving consciousness. The lonely cab horse, the lighting of the lamps, the masquerades that time resumes are imbued with the emotion of the observer. It is the observer who thinks of weary monotony and sameness of all the hands raising dingy shades, and perceives human being as dissembled parts of the body, the muddy feet, the short square fingers, the eyes assured of certain certainties. This fragmentation is a negation of individual identity. There is a greater complexity of tone and feeling in Preludes. The reader is not given an object rendering of her perceptions. However, there is a sharper distinction between the perceiving consciousness and the objects of perception in this prelude than in first and second, between the persona vision of the street and the street itself. The notion of the soul, constituted of 1,000 sordid images, is a denial of any spiritual dimension to the self. There are religious overtones in the lines. The conscience of blackened street, impatient to assume the world. Blackness implies a sense of sin and conscience of moral discrimination and responsibility. The distinction between subject and object is again blurred. Whose conscience is it? That of the street or of the perceiving self? At this point, the poetic voice speaks directly for the first time and admits that it is not detached and impassive. There is not of compassion and of tentative movement towards religious belief. The notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing is perhaps a compassionate conception of the suffering inherent in the images around which the poet fancies are curled and in the souls constituted by these images. It is a reminder also of the suffering of Christ to redeem the sins of humanity. However, there is a change of tone. Sad and religious vision is sardonically brushed aside. It is not entirely obliterated, though. The cynicism perhaps conceals a nostalgia and wistfulness for an absent ideal. The typographical space emphasizes the gap between the ideal and the actual. However, the times of day at which the four short poems that make up Preludes take place to suggest another meaning. The events and scenes described in Preludes are, in a sense, building up to something and are merely warm ups to something bigger, such as getting ready to go to work in the morning. The first poem is set on a winter evening at 6 o'clock. We are treated to the sights, sound, and smell of this evening. The smell of the dinners being cooked in nearby restaurants, the hovering down on the chimney pots of the house, the wind blowing the fallen leaves and discarded newspapers across the street. This opening poem concludes with the coming of night and the lighting of the street lamp. The second poem takes place in the morning when people are rising from bed and trudging to work, stopping at coffee stand for a pick-me-up on the way. There is still a faint smell of stale beer, a reminder of the previous night barrel going on. Countless people are all over the town or city are getting ready to resume the masquerades of daily life, work, school, and the like. The poem's speaker imagines all of the people raising the dingy shades in their furnished rooms, that is, rented rooms, implying that they are possibly also squalid and cheap to let in the morning light. The third poem takes a little, and rather than using the first or third person, the speaker addresses us directly using the second person you. This time the focus is on lying awake at night, unable to sleep, tossing the blanket off. You is a nice touch. Who hasn't done this in frustration when plagued by insomnia? Watching the night revealing all the sordid images lying deep inside the mind. This is a wonderful evocation of the way the mind becomes awash with horrible images when we can't sleep. Sleep continues to elude us, and then it's morning, the light reappearing and the sparrows chirping outside. We are then treated to the most remarkable pair of lines in the whole of Preludes. How can the street understand our vision of it? One possible way to interpret this is to say that when we have been kept up all night by unpleasant thoughts, we feel different about the world outside, while everyone else now stepping out into the street has been blissfully ignorant and asleep. We have been on a dark night of the soul and feel we have come to see the world for what it really is. And then one must get up and get ready for work anyway. Despite the sleepless night, taking the paper from one's hair, it's been in the curlers all night, or massaging one's feet ready to begin the walk to work again. The fourth and the final poem returns to the evening. For its setting, we get the bizarre image of a soul, stretched tight across the skies, gods perhaps whom the modern material world has forgotten in its impatience to get on with the tasks and chorus of the day-to-day living. This would make sense if we interpret the soul stretched across the evening skies as a reference to the sunset. But this soul is also trampled beneath the insistent feet of people heading home from work. The world is full of impatient activity and people striding confidently about their business. Men suffering their pipes, reading the evening papers, eyes looking sure of themselves. The street is corrupted, blackened by pollution and industrialization, but also black in a more abstract, metamorphical way. But amongst all this, the speaker of the poem is moved by fancies that can be found curled around these sordid urban images. Some being who is gentle and suffering infinitely, but before he can get too romantically sentimental about this, the speaker seems to straighten himself up and clear his thought and recollect himself. You have to laugh. The poem then ends with the image of these different worlds, inhabited by people revolving like ancient women who are gathering fuel in vacant lots. Tomorrow we will discuss the poem in detail. Thank you.